My mom has stage 4 cancer in her bones and in her breast. My dad's disease was 15 years, he died of ALS. I made a podcast about death, seemed like the thing to do. And if you're sad by all of this, well, you're gonna die too. Mackenzie, I am so grateful to learn more about you today. I'm really excited by all that you are doing in the Bay Area and virtually. So thanks so much for your time. I'm happy to have you.
Thanks so much, Chelsea. It's a pleasure to be here.
Of course, this is exciting. So I love how I nerd out about grief things and grief people. I'm like, this is exciting for me. Woo! Everyone else is crying while they listen, and we're just like, yay, woohoo!
Yes.
But we're here to hold the space. Okay, Mackenzie, one question I ask all of my guests right off the bat is about their goldfish moment. And this is the first time you thought about or conceptualized death in some way. For some people, it was a goldfish. Is there a moment from your early childhood that comes to mind when I say that? Goldfish moment. Did your goldfish die? Goldfish moment. Did it make you cry?
I honestly think there were a few. I totally did a proper burial for my guinea pigs and had friends over and for that. But I think about my Aunt Yvonne dying when I was pretty young, and she was awesome. She would braid my hair and go and stay with her during the summer. And I remember getting up and feeling moved to speak out at her funeral. And I was young. I was under 10, I would say. And I still didn't quite understand where she went or anything. And I didn't really grow up in a religious home. We went to a Unitarian church sometimes, maybe a few times a year. But my dad would sometimes say to me as a little girl at night, love you, good night, make sure to say your prayers. And I actually didn't know what he meant. I didn't have any reference to what saying prayers was, but I would intuitively just say hi to all of my dead relatives. Hey, great grandpa Cardwell and grandma Cardwell and grandma Studebaker, grandpa Stude. I would just say hi to all of them.
That's really interesting how you have those early memories and then it's either led you or however you've ended up here holding space for others in grief world. Do you mind sharing a little bit more of the context for our listeners as to where you grew up and who you grew up with? And if you could walk us through the timeline of your grief story. I know we're here to honor your brother and mother today.
So I grew up in the Bay Area, just south of San Francisco. I'm the eldest of 3. I grew up with my mom and my dad and my brother, who's just 18 months younger than me. And then my little sister, Chloe, who is actually a bitchin' musician in San Francisco of Zelma Stone.
I really thought you were going to say, who is a bitch? And I was like, this is taking such a turn.
No, I love Chloe. But
oh my gosh.
Bitchin' musician, yeah.
Awesome. Love bitchin' musicians. Love the Bay Area. Also from there. Okay. Love it. Love it.
Yeah. So that's my family unit. And let's see, when I was 21, it was pretty standard. I always think that up until my brother died, I was 21. I was just about to finish my undergrad. And it was just before the weekend before my last semester of school that I got that awful phone call from my dad that Brett had been killed in a car accident. And he was 19 at the time. And that just shook me to my core. And it dropped me out of what I think up until then, I was kind of living from this head up sort of, I'm going to go to college and then I'm going to go to law school. And actually law school couldn't seem more out of alignment and integrity with who I am. But that was just kind of the trajectory of, we were all fed, and when Brett died, I just it just sunk me. I keep thinking it just sunk me right into my heart and nothing really made sense. But the only thing that did make sense was pursuing that which I was genuinely interested in, because you could die at any fucking moment.
We can't compare losses, as you hold space for people who are grieving. And I will say that someone in their teenage years dying in an accident is really challenging. That's really tragic. I'm wondering how you handled those first few years. What did conversations around his loss look like?
I mean, so many people don't know what to say. And sadly, they say the wrong thing.
Yeah.
But I think I may be drawing a blank because it felt like that for a while. The only thing that made sense to me and that was like truly helpful was writing, which has since turned into a book. But in those early years, I mean, I was 21 and like that's a hard time in general. Like when you're like, oh, I'm gonna go out into the world now and I got my degree and gonna take on the world. And I might have seeked out a therapist, but it didn't last long. Nothing really did. I ended up like woofing. Have you heard that acronym? Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. And I did like
Yes.
a work, yeah. And
Yes.
I like,
Wait, will you share a little bit more about that for someone who doesn't know? Because that's
yes,
amazing.
yeah. Worldwide Opportunities on Organic Farms. Myself and my girlfriend at the time went living out of my car and stayed at cool farms all over the Southwest and the Northwest. And that was actually exactly what I needed to do. And I was grateful that I had the support of my parents who were grieving in their own way. And my little, home with my little sister who was still in high school at the time. I kind of felt like I needed to be held by the universe, if you will, or just kind of try and find meaning and feel still connected to Brett in some way. I think the conversations early on with people, no one knew what to say. And, I remember feeling all kinds of feelings because there was actually no one was sure who was driving that night. So there was also this sense of like, was Brett behind the wheel? Was he not? There were just no answers. And it was really hard to also witness my family grieve. Maybe it's because I'm the oldest child. I don't know. But it was just hard to witness my parents go through it. Since then, subsequently in my professional work, I've led grief groups for parents who have lost adult children and found that vicariously healing to be able to hold space for them because I can't imagine what it's like to lose a child. So it really just shook our whole family unit deeply. But we did still honor. What I love about my family is that it wasn't like not your standard waspy family, and that like it was okay to talk about Brett. We talked about Brett. I experienced everyone in my family crying and expressing their grief, and that felt helpful. That was permitted. We were allowed, if you will, to do and express whatever was coming up for us.
That's really beautiful, and I'm glad that you shared that. Another question on that, and this is not a trick question, but since you are a therapist, what advice do you have for someone who is not having those conversations in their family unit and may need to unload immediately? My thought is seek out a therapist, but I wonder what comes up for you. Is there a first step someone can take who is looking for some kind of relief?
Yeah. I mean, it's so necessary that we don't keep it in because it can be so limiting our own perspective. And it's so complex and grief is so confusing. So to be able to have a witness for our grief is just so helpful. And I agree with you. I think, seeking out therapists, seeking out people that aren't intimidated by grief. I was actually kind of disturbed through my school, my master's program, realizing that like grief and loss weren't always topics that were brought up. And I was like, what the hell? Like, no, as my late grandpa Bob would say, nobody gets out of here alive, like
Yeah.
how could that not be in when I was seeking out supervision, I knew that I wanted to work at a hospice. I remember seeking out some therapists as potential supervisors and some of them saying I wanted to work in grief and loss, and them saying, well, that's not really in my scope of practice, and thinking, what the fuck? So definitely the right therapists, people who work in end of life and grief and bereavement. Also, there can be resources at local hospices for those in bereavement. So that's a good resource to look for as well. Even just asking if you know a friend. I remember in moments of desperation, I knew of a friend of a friend of a friend, really, who had lost her brother tragically a few years before Brett died. And I reached out to her because I was like, all my friends who I call crying and they say, I know, Mackenzie, I know. And I say, no, you don't fucking know. You don't know. That's not the right thing to say. You do not know. And, I just had a lot of anger too, but talking to someone who knew, who has been through an experience of loss, that is also a resource that was invaluable for me in the beginning.
Thank you for sharing that. Very helpful. And on the note of therapy, there's a friend of mine coming to mind whose mom recently died of cancer. She also lives in the Bay Area. And we were talking the other day, and she's like, I'm really struggling with signing up for therapy. I've gone before, and I want to admit something to you right now, Chelsea. I have a total block. I've signed up a couple times and I haven't showed up. There's something so overwhelming for me about unpacking this loss of my mom. Can you share what comes up for you when I say that? I totally understood. I was like, I get it. And I was like, please sign up. I know you'll benefit. But is there a block that comes up when it comes to downloading? I'm wondering what comes up when I say this.
Oh my goodness, completely relate to your friend and just how vulnerable it is. We live in such a death phobic society. No one wants to talk about it. And so to purposely put ourselves in the way of processing it is so courageous, is such a courageous act towards healing and coming into a place of more integration with the reality of life. And it can also bring up our own existential sense of our own mortality, that if everyone we know is going to die, that means I'm going to die too. So it's a lot to unpack. And I just think there's a lot of, your friend has a lot of self-awareness to acknowledge that there's some block. And all I want to say to them is it's valid. There's nothing wrong with acknowledging that it's hard, and it takes a lot of courage to want to not be the victim in our lives, but to be a part of, to know that, I don't know, this is some Instagram quote from somewhere I can't, credit, of course, but you're not responsible for what happened, but you can't, it's your responsibility to heal while you can't, I can't even get the quote right, but it does take courage, and you have to just be ready, and you can't really do it until you're ready. So it might not be, I wasn't ready for a while until I was ready.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And so you shared with us the experience of losing your brother, and then several years later, your mom died of breast cancer. I'm wondering if you can... I love how your first response was a laugh. We love that here on the Dying of Laughter podcast. You just have to laugh. Can you share more about her diagnosis through her loss?
Yeah, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer when I was in college. So Brett died in 2010. My mom's breast cancer first showed up in 2008, I believe. And while I always loved this about my mom, she didn't really resonate with the language of fighting it. You got to fight cancer. That wasn't her way. It did subside. She did go into remission for many years. It did come back in 2014. And I mean, it was so hard to witness my mom. My mom missed my brother so much. And she was the strongest person I know, and really was able to, I remember her sitting she was an artist and interior designer and photographer. And I remember her sitting in the cool leather club chair in our living room that she had, of course, designed. And years after, and just having come to it on her own, Mac, it is what it is. And that took her a long time to be able to accept. And of course that came in waves, but she had a way of, and she did a lot of her own reading about the afterlife and still being in connection. That really helped her. But yeah, it came back in 2014, and we were actually in a lot of denial. I've got some writing about this actually, but we were in a lot of denial about it. I thought maybe it was depression, but the cancer had spread to her brain. So her cognition was failing, and it happened quick. she was in the hospital for 2 weeks, and then we brought her home in hospice for 2 weeks, and she was gone. So she died December 7th, 2015. Yeah, I have a lot of writing about this, actually, that's in the book.
It's really beautiful that you've written this down and written your feelings down, which I'm going to go more into I would love to hear more about your book in just a moment. And just wanted to say thank you for sharing this story. And it's, breast cancer, I always say, sometimes I say has a special place in my heart, but then I laugh because that's not what I mean, because it doesn't. And also I don't want cancer near my heart, but it's frustrating that breast cancer is so likely to come back. And I do say that not to scare anyone or be negative, but my mom was in remission. It came back. You're mentioning your mom as well. And I hope to increase a little bit more awareness about that. We were very, very shocked when her cancer returned. And upon further research, it's clear that is actually less shocking than one thinks. And I feel that might change some people's opinions on breast cancer in general. Of course, no one wants to get it. It's horrible, but I do think sometimes it's like, okay, it's one of the better cancers and but it's likely to come back, so that's not better. And what is a better cancer? Thank you for
yeah. Right. Yeah. No, I mean, there's no one, we definitely have some humor in our family around it. I know that I actually was given a diagnosis of multiple sclerosis in 2014. So my mom and I lived, both with these like scary diseases, together for a year and a half. And I remember, my mom would say, swipe the card. If you need to swipe the card, like, if you need to get out of something, like to use the C word, cancer.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah. Swipe the card if you need to. And she would also refer to when she would go to get chemo as her spa day.
Amazing.
Yeah. As her spa day. And I actually think of her every time I go and get my treatment, which I'm very grateful to receive. That when the nurse is like, can I bring you a warm blanket? I say, yes, please. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And just kind of enjoy it. So she had a beautiful way of reframing and not being the victim and not letting that be the centerfold of her identity either. My mom was an artist, and that is, the cancer didn't define her. And I also love that about her too. It's so influenced how I move through the world, and just our ability to choose where we put our energy and what we give our power to. Yeah. Also not being defined by the fact that I have a dead brother and a dead mother, but it has deeply informed how I move through the world. Absolutely.
I love everything you just said. I normally ask podcast guests about podcast. I should call them. That just sounds weird. I normally ask the podcast people. I normally ask, is there a comedic moment that has influenced your experience around grief? And if you could share more about your mom and who she was. And I feel like you beautifully just answered those questions about talking about her being an artist and not being defined by that. And I think it's not being defined by her cancer, which I think is really interesting when you show up in grief spaces as you are doing and I am doing. It's like, okay, well, I don't identify as the grief podcast person, but it is a big part of my life. And I'm also someone else outside of what I'm doing. So I'm wondering, you've experienced loss via accident as well as via cancer. A question I get often is, what are the biggest differences do I see when talking to people who have lost people in different ways? I'm wondering, having experienced both, what differences presented themselves in these two losses, as well as what similarities?
Yeah. I think about how the nature of, it was actually a hospice nurse who told me this when my mom was dying. She said, people tend to die how they lived. And I was like, whoa, that's what the hell? That's a lot to think about. But I think of, the nature of Brett's death, how quick he went, and that it was literally, he helped me pack up my car when I was moving to Santa Cruz to do my last semester there. He walked me down the steps. He gave me a big hug, said he'd be visiting soon. And that was the last time I saw Brett. And then I think of, in this weird way, my family did get to say goodbye to Brett, but we we didn't get to be with dying, like as a verb. With my mom, because we were given this terminal diagnosis and we were introduced to this word hospice, which was the scariest word to enter my lexicon ever, and just a total paradigm shift as far as there not being any sort of denial about what was happening. We got to be with her in her process of dying, which was like this deep, sacred gift for my family. I got to say all those things that I needed to say to her, and of course there's still more. And I still think, oh, Mom, I want to ask you this. And I also feel at this point in my life that I can, and I do. And that I've arrived at a place with my brother as well, with Brett, that I still feel that I'm in relationship to them. It's changed, and in some ways we don't have the baggage of like a mom-daughter relationship or of siblings. There's like a clarity and just a purity of how I connect with them now. But that is a big difference. With Brett, it was just a shock to my family, to our whole system, to the whole community, really at large. So many young people, so many of our friends. And with my mom, she really gave us such a beautiful example of what it was like to not fight, and to, I say in my book, I say at one point, like, you really welcomed death graciously into your home. That was just profound to witness, and to see that as an example of how we can let go and welcome whatever great mystery comes next.
Beautiful. So on that note, there's a lot of beautiful ways that you are supporting others grieving and in their lives. As a poet, writer, psychotherapist, and yoga and meditation teacher, I'm wondering if you can share a little bit more about those different pillars, and certainly your work showing up for people as a grief counselor and therapist is interesting to me. They're all interesting to me, but I wonder how they intersect and how also they stand on their own.
Yeah. It was right after Brett died that somehow I got the clarity that I wanted to study and practice yoga, but it came really strong. And I feel grateful that I listened and that I was in the position that I could pursue that. And that's been a huge part of me developing my own like inner trust and a meditation practice. So I think at different times in my life, I've felt like, oh, I need someone to just tell me what to do, or to feel like the answers were outside of me. And so having and being so dedicated to yoga and meditation really helped me develop that gut intuitive, even though sometimes I'm like, wait, where was that? I could have used that yesterday. But, nobody's perfect, but like, and nor would I want to be. But in that sense, like, it's been a profound resource for me. And I found it to be, a lot of my work for many years has been working with youth. And I think of all of the, the teenagers that I've gotten to teach yoga to around the Bay Area, whether they're in high schools or juvenile hall, and that has been also, I always think, when I meet these like teens, they remind me of my brother too. So Brett's forever a teen. So I think about him too, when I would work with these teens and kind of help them develop more life skills that we just aren't taught. We ought to be taught in school, but the power of breathing deeply and trusting our intuition and just knowing where our bodies are in space and befriending ourselves. I think that's a huge one, being able to be in a harmonic relationship with ourselves. That's a life practice. It's a lifelong journey. So that kind of led me into psychotherapy, and at the same time, actually writing. I've written before that I came out as a queer person many years ago, but I only came out as a writer after my mom died. And it's been such like a gutturally deep part of me, like feels like really wants to be expressed and held in the world. And it took me going through these losses to have the courage to share and to pursue that. And a lot of what I write is dark. Well, it's not dark, but it's just about death and loss and grief. And it's for some reason, I know I'm good with interpersonal skills, but I actually am even better at being truthful when I write and I share my writing. And, coming into this career of a therapist is incredibly humbling and also incredibly rewarding, because as tempting as it can be to have this urge to want to fix or save, that's really not my job. And I wouldn't have wanted anyone to fix or save me, as I look back and like take away my pain as much as it's hurt. Like, I've had the gift of living long enough to see a flower. I always think of like on a freeway or cemented pavement sidewalk, and like dandelions or flowers that somehow are able to grow through that. And I think about that, like that I've just had the privilege to live long enough to see beautiful things unfold in a way that couldn't have everything not unfolded the way that it did. So all of them kind of create this situation, for lack of a better word, or this dynamic or this ability for me to feel more integrated. And like that grief is not this like scary thing that I don't have space for. I still grieve. It's been 12 years since Brett died. And I remember on February 6th of this year, like just being like, damn, he would have been what, 30, 31, 32, like, damn, I'll always be with grief of his potential. And
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you.
Yeah.
Is his birthday February 6th?
That was his death day. His birthday is August 5th.
Okay. My dad's birthday is February 6th. So.
Oh, wow. That's a cool. Yeah. I mean, I think about that too all the time, that the significance of those days. And I do want to share this to your audience, that if you have those, well, I never want to give advice around how people ought to grieve. I'll just speak for myself. But somehow I think of those, I frame those days as like portals in which I have more access to be in flow with myself, which means that I'm more connected to Brett or my mom. So there's like an auspicious quality at this point in my life. Maybe not always, like I dread them, you know what I mean? And my partner, also named Chelsea,
awesome.
will say like,
Love
I know
that.
what we're coming. Yeah. I know we're coming up on this week. And they're really great about that. Just knowing, like dropping the expectation of my output or how I'm going to be, that just the seasonal kind of like trauma of it can come forth, like the last day my mom got out of bed was on Thanksgiving. And so that was all kinds of like baggage for me now, or like, yeah. So I find that the dates are significant and I pay attention to those things now. And I've found so much also, I guess that's kind of a separate topic, but yeah.
I'm curious what you're going to say about the separate topic and the dates. I'm intrigued.
Yeah. Well, I did, when I finished my graduate school program in my research methods class, my final research proposal, I decided to write it was a narrative inquiry research project about the relationship between birds and the bereaved. Because the morning after Brett died, this little bird landed on his windowsill and just like pecked like all day long. And I have a piece in my book about it. And my family found so much comfort from this. It came for months, and this little bird would just station on my brother's windowsill. It was like, even like the biggest critics and people who were so far from woo were like, what the hell? Like, it was just, and I did a bunch of research on it, and it turns out that's like quite a phenomenon. If it's not a bird, it's a song, or it's electricity, or there's all kinds of ways in which, kind of in these synchronistic ways, those who are in early grief can feel a lot of comfort in kind of what they perceive to be signs from their loved one that they're okay. Anyways, that's another arena in which, when I feel the presence of birds around, I kind of feel my mom or my brother.
I love that. And I recall reading about you when you, in the form you filled out before this, about your thesis with birds. And I found it really interesting. I, in some ways, miss my early stages of grief, and I find numbers really interesting too. My dad also died in 2010, and that's the date your brother died in his birthday. And, it means something or it doesn't, but I find it interesting. And the early stages of grief, I felt really connected to nature and to these signs, to these things. And I think that as time goes on, perhaps less so when it does happen, it's very wonderful. But I wonder, in your research for this thesis, what came up around that, about those early signs? And when you say people's perceptions, how much do you think is the connection versus our perception? And it totally doesn't matter. To me, I'm like, whether something is this or that, it doesn't matter. But I wonder what research came up there. I find it fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, that is very coincidental about your dad's birthday in that year. I have a lot of people who say like 2010 kind of sucked. So
Fuck 2010.
Yeah, there's a lot going on then. Yeah, I mean, it also comes to when you're talking about death and like the afterlife and all of these, no one knows. No one and of course our logical mind and our science driven world is maybe going to minimize, but I'm with you that there was a magic to being in early grief. Was it Joan Didion who wrote The Year of Magical Thinking, like that you're kind of just more open. And there's like I write about it like broken open, can't go back, have to be with life now. And there's something magical to being broken open, to realizing that nothing is permanent, and that if I wanted to, I could still be in relationship with them. I mean, there was all kinds of research about this phenomenon of course, I'm forgetting in this moment all of the terms, but there are many technical terms for the experience of that which couldn't be explained in a rational way, but these meaningful coincidence or synchronicities that would show up for folks after their loved one died. And it actually wasn't about proving. It was a narrative research. So it wasn't about proving if it was true or not. And that's a stance I take as a therapist. I trust you. This is your reality. I'm not going to gaslight your reality here. This happened and this was meaningful to you, and how deeply comforting it is as humans for us to find meaning and to make meaning from things that are seemingly horrendous and awful and make no sense,
That's incredible. I have some theories, is not the right word, but I have some feelings around something that is so connected to us and powerful, that is the afterlife. It's almost like not of this world, literally. So when you try and describe it, and like you say, use scientific terms, it almost just like turns to fairy dust. It's like this other, and I'm not sure what I believe, but it's like anytime I think someone's trying to describe their experiences in early grief or these synchronicities, there are these people that I feel like might not feel it's connected, or if it wasn't them, it's like the eye roll, but it's because it's of another, I don't know. So you can't really talk about it without it making sense, but you can feel it and you can know it, but you can't really articulate it. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does make sense that it's maybe not even poet in my life that I love. He said like words at best mislead. And I think of that often, that especially when we're talking about that which is no longer physical, when like I talk about Brett, and Brett's no longer in his like tall, awkward, like budding teenage body anymore. Like it's the words. That's why I write a lot of this book is written in poetry. I found that it's a memoir, but it's written in poetic verse. And that was the way that I could get around how words could be limiting. I could use them in a more expansive way, in a poetic way that could give space for all that we can't possibly make sense of. And anyone who tells you they know, I run in the opposite direction because there's just so much mystery to it. And in a way that's just so beautiful That's just so beautiful.
And I'm so honored to have gotten to read some of your poetry. And before we turn the tables and have you read some here, because you're holding space for so many other people with regards to their grief and the other traumatic experiences in their lives, how do you take care of yourself? How do you show up for Mackenzie? As someone in the grief spaces too, people ask me that, and I find it interesting what other people say.
That's a good question. It's so important. I have a regular writing practice. I do my morning pages.
I love that. Hashtag the
Yeah,
artist way.
exactly. Forever. And I also, I have a meditation practice and I have a movement practice. And these all really help me stay embodied and stay curious and open to not knowing. And I feel really grateful. I have such a wonderful circle of friends and loved ones that I know I can talk to. And I'm a therapist, so I've got all these like therapist friends too. And of course, it's been such a good practice for me and learning throughout all these years to be able to receive and to be able to say, do you have space for this? Can I talk to you about something? And not to hold it in, not to say, oh, I'm good. It's fine. Everything's good. Yeah, good. How are you? Good. When it's really not good. So having outlets, trusted outlets with people that I know can hold, that aren't there to like give me advice, has been crucial. And also books. Like I find a lot of support from reading and listening to other people's stories and realizing that we're kind of like the nature of this beautiful offering that you bring into the world, Chelsea, like that we're not alone in something that society wise can feel just like the pits and like we're the only one, and that's just not true.
Beautiful. I really, I was today years old when I learned, as they say on TikTok, that a therapist has a lot of therapy friends, and that's amazing. So
Yes.
the real reason to become a therapist is you will be surrounded by lots of support. That's actually awesome.
It's the best. Yeah. It's a benefit.
That's
Absolutely.
awesome. And Mackenzie, you mentioned earlier your own diagnosis that you received. And I know there's a lot that we're talking about here, but I wanted to provide space for you to share more about that. How are you feeling? That's another thing that you've been through that I think could add some value to others. I'm sorry that that's the case. How are you feeling?
Yeah. Yeah. No, thank you. I'm well. I'm really well. I wasn't always, but and I would never say this to anyone else. You have to really come to this on your own. I've realized, or I've just come to it, but I'm able to see it as a gift at this point, that it's been a profound teacher. I don't really identify so much with it. Like, that's not the support group that you would find me in. There are other support groups that I would be a part of, and that's not one of it.
Sure.
But it's given me the opportunity. I've been asymptomatic for many years, and I almost forget about it, except for when I go in to get, my treatment, which I'm grateful for. And I think not identifying with it, but not being in denial about it, like being open to receive support in all many forms, Eastern, Western, all of it. Yeah, has helped me. And it's actually not something I talk about so often, but it's okay. I feel okay about talking about it here right now, because I know I'm not the only one who has been given an autoimmune disease diagnosis. So it's pervasive culturally, but for me, absolutely, it's been another way in which I'm reminded of impermanence, and also that I know what's best for me more than anyone. I don't care what fucking letters are at the end of their name. They're all of their professional means. It's been an opportunity for me to feel more, to learn how to be more empowered and to feel more in touch with what is right action for me and how that is not for anyone else. So yeah, it's a journey, but of not taking it personally, of not being hard on myself about it, of swiping the card every now and then when I need to.
for artists listening, it's like, you don't have to make art out of trauma either. It's like, okay, just because we're showing up in grief spaces, someone else doesn't have to also do that. If they want to, by all means, like, please, I hope it's inspiring. And if not, that's okay too. That's what's coming up for me. So thank you for sharing a little bit more. And I'm glad you've been asymptomatic. That's really good news.
Oh, totally. I mean, I think also speaking to the artist, like I had to write a lot about the darkness, and then it guided me to the light. And I've been able to write a lot about like queer joy as well. And that's like newer stuff that I'm working on. But that, I think that they are all it's all deserving of expression.
Wonderful. And Mackenzie, I wanted to ask you as well, is there ways that people can show up for queer people in the grief experience specifically? I know that you're not speaking for everyone in the queer community, but wanted to give space if there's something that comes to mind.
I'm sure there's more resources that I'm aware of. I think it's helpful sometimes to be mirrored by people. It was helpful for me to get a queer therapist myself and to have that mirrored in that experience. So I think just what's coming to me is ritual. And as a queer person, I'm reframing this, but we have the opportunity to to make ritual work for us in ways that we weren't always included. And so there's actually something really liberating about that, to be able to decide for ourselves how we're going to honor our dead, how we're going to honor our grief, that grief is welcomed, that grief is nothing to be afraid of, and that we don't do it alone. So having community to grieve, that's what's coming to me, is how powerful that can be. I mean, my friends knew it was Brett's death anniversary, so we stood out on the cliffs in Santa Cruz, and Chelsea brought some hard kombuchas.
Love that. Love that.
And I poured a little bit out for Brett, and and just like kind of cheers to him, and that was enough to have friends that knew him and who didn't know him but wish they had met him, be able to acknowledge and share that with them, that this is today, this is for you, Brett.
I love that image of pouring a little bit out for him. That's incredible. And I love that Chelsea brought hard kombucha, as Chelsea's do. We have more and more common every day. Okay. Mackenzie, I would love at this point for you to choose a poem from your incredible book that you could share with us today.
All right. This one is the prologue. It's the first piece of the book. I want to read this one because I'm using you statements. So I'm hoping that the reader can insert themselves here and maybe relate to this feeling of what it's like to grieve in our world. Every day is the worst day of somebody's life. And this is a dedication to that somebody, because their somebody has died or is in hospice care actively dying. And they are left in mourning out in the world, mattering about material matters. You are standing empty-handed in a Safeway on a mission to distract yourself buying roses that you will surround your dying person with. You stand with ambivalence in the aisles of things that will never have heartbeat, can never have rhythm. You stand amidst strangers in their day-to-day, strolling, scrolling, lolling, buying food products for emotional nourishment, so unaware that today is the worst day of your life, the worst fucking day of your life. How are we all so separate? Shouldn't we all know that your person is dying? Shouldn't we all know what to say? But no one knows. No one knows what to say. And so we don't say anything. We say nothing at all. Except for sorry. Everyone is so fucking sorry. No one seems to know in that grocery store that each mindless breath we take brings us closer and closer to our final breath as we lollygag over what brand of toilet paper to buy, lackadaisical, indolent. No one knows in that grocery store. No one knows. No one knows in that grocery store that your person is taking final breaths while you still are trying to do something, so you distract yourself with flowers, roses to adorn your dying person with. No one knows until you know, until it happens, and it will happen. We are all going to die.
Beautiful.
Okay. This is a shorter one. This is called 21st Birthday. Brett, you die as a teenager, but on your 21st birthday, your friends come over. Mom is in her body still, and we are all broken open and fragile, just 18 months since you left. Sammy did not yet have the treehouse so colossally tattooed on his body. The reminder was much more somatic and constant at the time. I remember getting you a cake, or rather getting us a cake, lighting candles, and my little sister Chloe walking the cake over to the kitchen table in front of Sammy and your other buddies, because you were not in your body to blow the candles out. You are in that flame, and you are the fire that remains even after we blow the candles out. It is anticlimactic and a crush lighting those candles. A pitiful, partially conscious attempt to will you back into name and form. We try to start the happy birthday song, but it quickly gets sad and wilts, along with the high hopes that you will show up for some cake. It's nice that your friends come over. Mom and Dad really like this. When we blow out your candles for you and there's nothing to smile about, Chloe turns to me, re-traumatized, and says, well, that's the last time we'll ever do that again.
I'm so moved. I rarely get emotional because I'm emotional. So I would say that as a compliment. This is beautiful.
Oh yeah. It's such a treat. I mean, this book has been like, it means the world to me. And I plan to publish this. It's called We Don't Need the Treehouse. And the references to the treehouse are an actual treehouse that my dad built. It was in our front yard and it was epic. It was like an Airbnb superstar success. Yeah, but so many memories. I just think about that treehouse as like a metaphor of, our literal family tree. And the house has since been sold, but I did take some of my brother and my mom and my grandpa Bob's ashes and scattered them below that tree, that live oak tree. So yeah, again, another kind of like the dates, kind of a portal, because I don't have a headstone. Like they weren't buried anywhere. In fact, my sister still has their ashes. We're still not sure what to do with that. And that'll be the last piece I read, is there's a reference to that. But the treehouse was just so significant. It was so, it just felt like such a place in which we could go to be with them.
I love that imagery. And also shout out to my dad's ashes in the garage. So, we just still hasn't been addressed. I have thoughts, but okay. I would love to hear your final piece.
I know that's a whole, you know what? I don't think we're the only ones.
No,
and when I read
not.
this last piece, no, we're not. When I'm going to read this piece, it's called Crematorium, very rightfully so. And I remember I read this at a poetry event, and one of the women came up to me afterward and says, my mom is underneath my bed. And I was so, so I'm so glad that we can talk about this and like what to do and where we go to honor our dead, especially if they're cremated.
First thing I ask is about your early memories of death. The last thing I ask is about your birth. Mackenzie, when is your birthday, and your favorite birthday tradition or something that makes you smile when you think of birthdays?
No, that's so fun. I love that. My next thing that I will likely do is get certified to be a death doula. But I believe that, birth and death, like that I could be a doula in both of those times of entering into the next, if you will. But I love birthdays. Chell always laughs at me because when it's my birthday, I always wish everyone else a happy birthday too. So I've been able to I just find a lot of joy from it. Yeah, just sharing that joy of like being alive and just for this finite time, and enjoying it and kind of staying also in that spirit of awe of what is all this?
Beautiful. And when is your birthday?
Oh, October 4th, 1988. 10/4/88.
Fantastic. I'm 4/4, so we're exactly 6 months.
Cool.
We're in the rotation of 6 months.
Yeah.
They're so connected. So we start with death, we end on birth in a reverse cycle. Mackenzie, this was an incredible conversation. Where can people learn more about you, connect with you online, and read your poetry?
Yeah, they can go to my website, which is my first and last name, MackenzieStudebaker.com. That's oriented a lot towards my therapy work and yoga, but you can reach out to me that way. And of course, if you happen to have, someone who knows someone, I definitely am actively pitching and submitting this book. So looking for the right home for it. And then I also perform periodically, slowly again, in this year in person in the Bay Area with Red Light Lit and with other writing groups. So I love performing live and being in person with folks, and even Zoom readings are cool too.
Incredible. Thank you so much, Mackenzie, for your time today. I am leaving just feeling so inspired and nourished, like you said. So I really appreciate your time. Thank you. This was fantastic.
Yeah, I'm glad that we share half birthdays.
Yes,
so fun.
Right. And see, it's like the silly amazingness of birthdays. We're on a cycle. I don't know what it is, but we're on it.
We are on it. Thanks so much, Chelsea.
Yodo, you only die once.